Welcome to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic, all roads lead to elections. I promise by the end of the show, you're going to fully understand what I'm talking about. Because all roads, everything that we're seeing in the media, it all points in one direction, and that's elections. So I woke up this morning thinking about the state of our country. The debates that we're having, such as whether men can give birth or women are really women, and how do we define it, along with all these thoughts around those who think that ICE should be abolished. And I had one thought in my mind. What is going on with our country? I mean, we've made some catastrophic mistakes over the last few years, mistakes that have led to mass illegal immigration, skyrocketing food costs, healthcare that feels more like a racket than a service. We have lying politicians who have lost all respect for those who elected them. Our elections are running amok. And out of all of this, the thing that happens to stand out the most is just our blatant disrespect when it comes to the laws or the order of our government. We have Democratic socialists saying things like, I'm following the Constitution. And on the flip side of the same coin, you have Republicans that are saying the exact same thing. Like, no, I'm following the Constitution. So who's really following the law? And not the law as they see it, but the law according to the foundational principles of this country. Because considering that both can't equally be supporting the Constitution, especially when they have opposing thoughts, how do we know the truth from all of the lies, from all of the confusion, the complexity of it all? There's an old saying that says, follow the money. Well, in this case, following the money will lead us right to what we thought it would lead us to, which is fraud and corruption. And unfortunately, that's an absolute dead end in the world that I live in, the political world, because what we understand is that there's always going to be those who come from other countries and try to figure out ways to circumvent our law in order to create their own ways and to turn the country into where they just left. That's to be expected, especially when you're working in politics. We understand that that's something that occurs. So seeing cases like Minnesota, where you have these Somalians that are, breaking the law by taking advantage of all of our loopholes, that isn't a shock, especially not to me or anyone else that works in politics. I mean, it happens and it's been happening for a very, very long time. Matter of fact, we're pretty certain that it's happening all across the country. However, there's something bigger that's happening right now that causes me to look a little bit deeper and does concern me as someone who works behind the scenes in politics. And it's the fact that there are so many Americans that are fighting against other Americans and are fighting against those Americans for doing what they are supposed to be doing as Americans. And then you hear our Democrat socialist Mayor Zoran Madani, who's the mayor of a major city, New York, talking about abolishing ICE. I mean, is he serious? But we have a major problem when you have people who just don't respect our laws. They don't respect our boundaries as a country. And our individuals who are living here, in most instances, these are people who come from all other countries, assimilating into our country. In most cases, they do it legally, but then they come in and they take office and they start representing our country. But instead, it feels as though they're representing the country they came from and the ideology that pushed them here. And that's when it becomes treasonous. It's starting to feel like we're dealing with a bunch of Trojan horses, and we don't know how to clean it up. Or maybe we do, but we don't want to. And unfortunately, the way to clean it up can't be done in this neat and tidy way full of hugs and compassionate requests. It's ugly. It's emotional. because we're dealing with human beings who want to be here no matter how they get here, even if it means breaking our laws. However, these are the same human beings who are okay with breaking our laws. But sovereignty says that we have the right to defend our country. We have a right to defend our legal citizens from tyranny and from treason. So when I hear particularly Black people saying things like, oh my God, they're rounding up the very people who helped build this country, meaning that there's some notion that America was created by a people of color who are immigrants here, whether they be slaves or whether they are Hispanic immigrants who came here legally or illegally. But somehow all of this illegal immigration is somehow now connected to slavery and somehow now connected to how we are able to sustain this country and the creation of this country. The fact of the matter is this country was founded by men, yes, flawed, but nonetheless, they all came together with a host of people, Black, white, Native American. They all fought in the American Revolution. They all fought for an ideal. They understood that this country wasn't perfect, but there was this idea that possibly we could get there. And it doesn't matter if our foundational principles doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't matter if the way this country was formed works for you as an individual. They're in place to establish order, to establish a system that can be relied on for centuries, not just for your generation. And unfortunately, we are stepping far, far away from that order. So I have a notion as to why I believe that we are seeing the rise of so many of these crazy things. Stuff that's either causing major distractions, confusion, is complicating the system, the process. It just feels ultimately so un-American, like the rise of mass illegal immigration, like the rise of those who support illegal immigration. And the fact that we have leaders who claim to be American or for America values, yet they're breaking down our defenses. The fact that instead of fixing our country and strengthening capitalism, which is our country's economic function, it's how we flow. Instead, they want us to move away from capitalism and embrace collectivism. This is a problem. We're building a society of people whose compassion works against the American ideals. The problem is that we are electing people who want to change America fundamentally into this system that hasn't worked for several other countries, which is why America is the only country that continues to stand strong. But only if we allow it to. We the people. But why? Why is this happening? What is the ultimate motivation? I have an idea, and I think it connects to our number one most fundamental right. Our number one way of defending us off of all of this, or away from all of this. Our number one way of sustaining our country is through our elections. It's elections. Elections is what separates us from every other third world country, where the only way you see a change of regime is if there's some type of coup. So during this show, I'm going to share how I believe the Somalian support that we're seeing in Minnesota with Minnesota leaders is tied to elections. How the quiet media silence on all the stuff that's happening here in Georgia with our elections, and how it all ties into the need to obtain votes. Because ultimately, this is all about creating permanent voting blocks. Voting blocks that will vote in up to 90 and more % in one direction for years. I know this because they did it to Black Americans. They did it to our community. This is not the first generation where we started fighting against communism or we've seen this. They've been around for a long time, but they perfected their long game. So here we are having to fight them again. It's more trickier than ever, but I see it. I see the Democrats looking for another victim. Because unfortunately, the Democrat Party doesn't work if there aren't people who are desperately in need of government aid or government support. Socialism dies without those who require the support of the government. So they have to maintain this, and they do it by creating this underbelly, this underclass of people who are addicted to government support. So while they claim it's about compassion, it's really about votes. And I'm going to show you. Because all roads really do lead to elections. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. We are just getting started. Don't leave the table. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. This is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. In today's table topic, all roads lead to elections. Before the break, I started by showing and sharing with you that my morning thoughts have led to this question that continues to be burning in my brain, which is, what is going on with our country? Why does it look like this? What is happening right now? We've reached a point where the most basic definitions like man, woman, citizen is being treated as debatable. But what's happening here, I believe, is more dangerous and is much deeper, and I feel like it's a Trojan horse effect where we're seeing individuals who are coming from other countries, assimilating into our system, and then working to transform America into the very place they left. And when you have people like the mayor of New York City calling for the abolishment of ICE, we're not just talking about policy now, we're talking about a refusal to respect our boundaries and our sovereignty. But today we're seeing leaders breaking down our defenses and creating these new ones, creating this new permanent underclass, a class of people who are addicted to government support. And why? Why are they doing this? Why are there so many that are working so hard to keep corruption undercover, or to maintain the status quo in our elections, or to get us to all accept a little bit of fraud in every election? It's because socialism dies without people who need the government to survive. They did it with Black Americans for decades. And now, because they're losing support from Black Americans, and so many Black Americans are saying, I'm tired of the Democrats, I'm fed up with the lies, let me try something different. They're looking for a new victim. They're looking for a new voting bloc to secure their power forever. And the only way all of this works and our leaders continue to amass power and wealth off the backs of taxpayers is by hiding their true motivation, disguising it under the idea of well-doing. The situation in Minnesota and the silence in the media regarding the election fraud and the chaos in Georgia all tie back to one thing: a fight for your vote. That's all that matters. Yeah, they're making a lot of money. Yeah, Eliana Omar went from being broke to being worth like $30 million in a couple of years, while they all fight against oligarchy and all the wealthy people who've earned their wealth over decades. But you get yours in 2 years and we're supposed to be okay with it? No. So let's get started. Let's go to the land of the 10,000 lakes, Minnesota. There's a new kind of math that determines who holds power over there, because we've been hearing a lot about protecting the community. That's what they're arguing. They're saying we have to protect our community in Minnesota. What community are they talking about specifically? The Somali community. Because on the surface, it's framed as a battle for civil rights. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's humanitarian compassion that we need to show these people. But if you dig into the numbers, it looks less like a moral crusade and more like a tactical defense of a critical voting bloc. So I'm going to break down what is called the Somali margin. Minnesota is home of the largest Somali population in the United States. Census figures place the number around 84,000 to 100,000 people. Now, they might sound like a small slice of the state when you consider 5.7 million people. But in politics, it's not about the total, it's about concentration. Nearly all of these voters are packed into the Twin Cities, particularly Minneapolis, Ward 6 in the 5th Congressional District. And in 2024, Ilhan Omar secured her seat with over 260,000 votes, which was a massive margin. But if you look closer at the statewide races, like in 2022, you'll realize that races like the Attorney General's office or the state auditor's office was decided by less than 1%. Very small margin. So when an election is decided by 8,000 votes or even 20,000 votes, and you have a voting block of 80,000 people who historically vote 70 to 90% in one direction, Democrat, it's not just a demographic anymore. This is the entire game. And the Dems over there will lose, if they were to lose even 15% of that support, the blue wall that the Minnesotans has put up will begin to crack. If anything, it will crumble to the ground. So yeah, there's money involved. But yeah, it's not just what you think it is. Because if we're just talking about individual $20 donations here and there, that's one thing. But we're talking about a sophisticated network of financial support where Somali American candidates like State Senator Akwam Mahmoud or Representative Omar Fattah have shown a strong ability to mobilize local capital. They're getting funded heavily. But where did the money go? Did it just go to their luxury cars and their shipments of cash over to Somalia? No, it didn't. I'm sure it found its way into the coffers of politicians who are now looking the other way. Politicians who are like, this looks weird, something seems off, but I'm just going to act like it's not. You see, you already have Republican investigators who are already issuing subpoenas to Governor Tim Walz and their Attorney General Keith Ellison, alleging that there could be a pay-to-play system here in exchange for political protection. And what do they get? These elected officials, they get unwavering financial and electoral support to guarantee that they maintain their seats. Because it's beneficial for everyone. Think about it. You have millions of tax dollars flowing to one community. And it took all but one day and a citizen journalist to uncover the fraud. Minnesota leaders have no clue. But there's a plot twist. Because in the 2024 election showed that there is a dent in the armor. In the Cedar Riverside hub, support for the Democratic ticket has dropped 14 points. Why do you think this is happening? Well, there's some voters who are saying that they're just tired of being taken for granted. Others are moving towards more socially conservative values on gender and education. This is why you see the rhetoric ramping up when President Trump talks about terminating temporary protective custody or investigating fraud. They don't just disagree. They call it treasonous. They call it racist. They use their harshest tones to try to get you to pull back. They have to. Because if the Somali community realizes that they don't have to vote as a bloc, or they are all shipped back to Somalia where corruption is tolerated, rather than here in this country where we don't tolerate it, then the current leadership in Minnesota loses its most valuable asset. But this isn't just about Minnesota, because this is a blueprint for all concentrated areas where they have a concentrated class of voters. That voters that can be utilized to sustain this political machine. You see in Minnesota, you see the Somalians, but you see Hispanic voters in other states. They're trying to advocate for keeping illegal immigrants here. The fight to protect the community is what they call it, is in many ways a fight for survival of the party that it relies on them. It's the Democrat Party trying to stay alive. They're dying because they allow this socialist rhetoric to take over their party, and they don't know how to pull back from it without losing a large portion of their voting bloc. Which voting bloc? The Gen Zers, the young voters that are all fluid and confused. But unfortunately, they're driving the Democrat Party right now, and they allowed this to happen when they allowed the squad to come on in. So yes, they're willing to support the thievery of these people if it means that they will continue to vote Democrat and relieve Democrat candidates from having to speak to all voters to win elections based on their solutions rather than voting bloc support. Because that's what Democrats rely on. That's why they're always trying to separate us into some type of category. We're always being pushed and siloed into some space. Because Democrats don't win unless they have voting blocs, unless they can move voting blocs. That is an obvious means of protecting their votes and their ability to control outcomes. But here's another way. Creating voting blocs and inflated voter rolls. We often think about voting blocs as these natural occurrences, right? There's groups of people who share the same cultural or neighborhood values and they all are kind of together. But what if I told you that voting blocs can be engineered, and we're seeing an engineering of voting blocs? And you can do it all through a single law or through a series of administrative glitches or policy shifts that all point in the same direction. So let's connect 3 dots that most people, I believe, see as separate and don't see it as connecting to the elections, but I know they are. Let's talk about voter rolls, and this, along with this push for gender fluid identity documents. I'm sure you haven't heard about that, or maybe whispers of it, but no one's really talking about it. And the strategic use of work visas. You see, when you pull back the lens, it's not just the identity or labor. It's about the math of 2026 and beyond. So let's start with the bloat. So voter rolls across the country are currently packed with what we call ghost voters. These are people who have moved, who have died, or otherwise they're ineligible voters. And Georgia is no exception, because despite what our SOS says, claiming that we have the cleanest voter rolls ever, we're like number 2 in the nation, we're so great, everything's so perfect, we see now that our voter rolls are not that. And I'm going to put a link to a video exposing Fulton County's dirty voter rolls in the description box from my good friend Jason Frazier, who they are still blocking from being on the Fulton County election boards. You see, in many states, the National Voter Registration Act, or the NVRA, makes it extremely difficult to clean up these lists, requiring years of waiting for these names to be removed or purged. But why does this matter? It matters because when you have bloated voter rolls, it provides cover. When you have thousands of inactive files sitting in the system, it creates a playground for ballot harvesting. And if you can identify a community where the rolls are dirty, you can push mail-in initiatives that target those specific addresses. Say, hey, this whole house is deciding that we want to vote by mail. Send us all voting applications based on everyone who's registered to vote in this house. Well, it's not uncommon to have 12, 13, 14 people registered to one house, although only 2 people live there currently. So the bloat isn't just an administrative error. It's a strategic reserve of potential votes that can be activated in the final weeks of a tight race. And let's look at the second dot, gender marker laws. We're seeing a wave of legislation allowing people to change their sex on their birth certificates and driver's licenses with little to no medical oversight. So I could be born a female, then all of a sudden decide I want to be a male, and then go change my birth certificate. So now I have my original birth certificate somewhere out there, but now I have this new birth certificate too. That's allowable. But what happens? Because there are people who say, oh no, that's a social issue. That's not an election issue, but it is an election issue. Because for an election official, this is a verification issue. If a birth certificate, which is the foundational document of citizenship, can be modified or issued with fluid data, then the chain of identity is broken. And it makes it harder to cross-reference data across state lines. And it makes it even extremely difficult to find duplicate registrations. More importantly, it creates a class of voters whose legal identity is tied directly to a specific party that granted them that status. So if your very legal existence depends on a specific administrative policy, if I don't have Democrats in leadership, then I somehow now am no longer, I'm erasing my identity. How do you think they're going to vote? Of course you're going to vote to protect the party that holds your identity in their hands. Of course you are. And then we have the rise of work visas or these H-1B. I'm not opposed to other people from other countries coming here and working, but I do think that we need to make sure we have checks and balances on that as citizens. Because we currently have hundreds of thousands of high-skilled workers here on dual intent visas. They're not just temporary workers. These are people who have a clear path to citizenship. And by prioritizing certain regions and industries with these visas, the government isn't just filling jobs. We're selecting a future electorate. We're creating a future electorate. And when you put all of this together, the ghost voters on the voter rolls, the fluid identity of birth certificates, the Somalians in Minnesota, the curated intake process of visa holders, you see a system that is designed to create permanent, loyal class of voters. It's not a conspiracy, it's a strategy. It's the creation of a voting bloc that doesn't just happen to agree with the party in power, but it requires the party in power to maintain its power. So as I sit here in Georgia and I sit on the state election board, I'm seeing a trend that is very unsettling. A trend of elected officials who are pretending to care about security of our elections. They want to see certain aspects of our election cleaned up without cleaning it all up. In other words, let's remove the QR codes, but let's not fund it. Let's not clean up the inflated voter rolls. Let's place the drop boxes inside of a secure location, but let's not go back to a world without them. Because, I mean, that would be a problem, right? Like, how do we live without drop boxes? Let's reprimand Fulton County and any other county who has all these election irregularities with a letter. But let's not send it to the AG's office for prosecution. Let's do just enough to appear like we care about elections. Just enough to not actually fix the problem. So here's the question I sit with. As I'm watching all this stuff happening in our elections, if the DOJ is asking the Secretary of State for voter rolls in order to assist with cleaning them across the country, free of charge to the state, a state who has no problem spending millions of dollars on a system that nobody wants. But we have an SOS who doesn't believe that they need to be cleaned because the rolls are the cleanest in the nation. But why not prove it? Or better yet, why isn't his attorney responding to the DOJ? Which would be our Attorney General, Chris Carr, who happens to be a gubernatorial opponent against Brad Raffensperger. Why isn't every candidate for governor not attacking Raffensperger on this issue? I'll tell you why. Because a little bit of fraud in every election can tip the scales. And when the scales are being tipped in your favor, it's hard to fight against tipping. An informed electorate is our best electorate. Have you ever noticed that the more we talk about transparency and security, the harder the rules are actually to understand? For example, we're debating voter rolls and tabulator tapes, two aspects of the election process that is paramount to security, and the bulk of the electorate base have no clue what we're talking about. Not only that, but have been conditioned to see something as easy as understanding hand-marked paper ballots as confusing. It's all by design. If you feel overwhelmed by the news, If the voter roll lawsuits, the certifying versus tabulating, what is an illegal voter versus an unqualified voter, Dominion, and oh, now it's Liberty Vote. Oh, wait, now it's, really the absentee ballots and the drop boxes, and now it's something else. The confusion is not by accident. There's a military strategy called the fog of war. It's the uncertainty in capability and intent that occurs during an engagement. And in 2026, we are seeing the fog of elections. If you want to secure an election, you will make rules so simple a fifth grader can understand it and can explain them. But instead, we get 1,000-page bills, administrative guidance, and changes that change every 6 months. Why? Because complexity is a barrier to entry. And when the process of vetting the voter rolls or verifying birth certificate changes becomes the legal web, the average citizen can no longer be a watchdog. You have to hire an expert. And when you hire an expert, just to understand your own government and your own elections, you've already lost your seat at the table. And this is called weaponized complexity. It ensures that only people who truly understand the gears of the system are the ones always turning them. And the psychological price that we all pay for this confusion is called voter fatigue. And research shows that when people are faced with too many complex decisions or inconsistent rules, they just get bored or they withdraw. Think about it. If you were told that the voter rolls are bloated with gender confusion in all the system, and the law to fix them is tied up in 3-year court battles on identity markers, your brain eventually hits a wall. It stops watching. It stops attending board meetings. It stops vetting candidates. And the withdrawal is the ultimate goal of a convoluted system. If the voting base is too exhausted to demand security, the permanent class of politicians can operate in the dark. Silence is just golden for them. It's the key to maintaining power and oversight. That's why they want everyone to shut up and go sit down. Get out of my way. Get out of my face. Stop asking me questions. Stop doing your job. But the fact of the matter is, in a republic, the citizens are the final auditors. But you can't audit what you don't understand. And when birth certificates are become fluid and work visas become a path to a voting block and the why gets buried under layers of jargon, and we're told that these changes are inclusion and progressive, but the byproduct of the system is impossible to verify, making the how of the election a mystery, they ensure the how of the outcome is never questioned. They want you to trade your duty of vetting for the comfort of trusting their process. There's an antidote. If a policy can't be explained simply, it's probably because it's not meant for you to understand it. But don't let the complexities be the reason you stop paying attention. In fact, the more confusing it gets, the closer you should be looking. So I want to close by showing you and giving you some hard facts surrounding Georgia's elections. A lot of what the media is not telling you, in my opinion, and why. And if you're not from Georgia or you're not living here, maybe it will cause you to look a little deeper into your state. We're almost done. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Don't leave the table. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic: all roads lead to elections. Before the break, we connected the dots on how a permanent class of voters is being engineered through bloated voter rolls, multiculturalism, the creation of communities like what we saw in Minnesota, fluid identity documents, strategic visas. And we just asked the question, what is going on in our country? But now I want to bring it home. I'm sitting here in Georgia. I serve on the state election board, and I'm seeing these same blueprints being rolled out in our own backyard. And right now, as we sit in January of 2026, we are in a standoff. We have the Department of Justice who has offered to help clean up our voting rolls for free. Yet we have a Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who claims that our rolls are the cleanest in the nation. We're seeing him fight a federal lawsuit in order to keep the voter rolls under wraps, while his attorneys, including his gubernatorial rival, Chris Carr, sits in silence. And the best argument that they can give all of us is that they are not working with the DOJ because they are protecting our Social Security numbers from the agency who issued them. Why the secrecy? Why do we see just enough reform to look like we care, to look like they are caring? Moving drop boxes, sending letters to Fulton County, but never actually fixing the rot. It's because of the fog of elections. They've made these rules so convoluted that the bills so long and the jargon so thick that the average Georgian suffers from voter fatigue. Now you're no longer watching, you're no longer auditing, you're no longer doing your process. You're no longer doing your duty. Instead, you're comfortable in the process of trusting. But I want to cut through the jargon. I'm going to give you some hard facts that the media is hiding, and particularly about Georgian elections. I'm going to explain some stuff to you. The truth is, our elections are not run as smoothly as they're made to believe. And a lot of it has to do with poor leadership. It has nothing to do with the fact that we have like all these counties. Yeah, we have a lot of counties. But our county officials can do their job if they have good leadership. Our SOS and his leadership staff has said that our elections in our country is the best, that our elections are even perfect. But that's just not true. Perfect elections are free of voter fraud, voter irregularities. They're free of admin and system errors, and they have clean voter rolls. We are short in every category. When it comes to voter fraud, we have hundreds of cases that prove otherwise. We have the Michelle Long Spears case, where she came in third place, and then after doing a paper audit, turns out she actually won. We have the Oakwood City municipal race, where 600 people were allowed to vote, of which 300 did, that weren't supposed to vote in that election, ultimately leaving us in question about who actually won the election, because the delta between the winner and loser was 88 votes. So we don't even know what happened in that race, and that was in 2024. We have the Bohemian lady who came before us, who voted 23 and now I believe it's 26 times in our elections, having been here for 30 years and never applied for citizenship. When it comes to voter irregularities and the breaking of our chain of custody, we just saw this become unveiled through the tabulator tape smoking gun, where 315,000 ballots in Fulton County. You see, in every election, our scanners spit out something called tabulator tapes. These are like a cash register receipt for democracy. And according to our state rule 183-1-12-.12, it's very specific that poll manager and 2 witnesses must print 3 copies and sign each to certify the true and correct copy. It's our primary chain of custody that links the machine and the certification. But in Fulton County, we now have official admission that over 130 tabulator tapes representing more than 315,000 early in-person votes from 2020 were never signed. And the Secretary of State's office calls this a clerical error. They say this is just an administrative mix-up from 5 years ago and don't let it rot your brain. But the state election board meeting that we held on December 9th, we heard a different story. Because these are not just errors. These are catastrophic breakdowns in our legal authority to certify an election if these tapes aren't signed. By law, the machine's results were never properly verified, yet they were certified anyway. Just like in that Oakwood case, where the SOS said certify anyway, even though we know people voted in that race that weren't supposed to. Certify anyway. And the SOS office claims that the machine count determines the outcome of the elections. Well, it gets a little deeper because it's not just about signatures. 10 of these tapes are missing entirely. That accounts for about 20,000 votes that are just gone. We don't even know. We don't even know what happened. Thank God our lieutenant governor is now calling for Raffensperger to answer this, because the state claiming that this is a human error is a problem. But thank goodness our board, we did vote to address this and send this to the AG's office. Hopefully they will take our advice and assess them with fines of $5,000 per tape. But think about it. If you tried to deposit a $315,000 check into your bank and the teller didn't sign off on the receipt, and instead the manager couldn't even find the transaction record, you think the bank will tell you, oh, just trust our process? Of course not. But when it comes to your vote, they tell you that wanting a signature is extremist, and that asking questions is out of order. This is why the fog of elections is so thick. They want you to believe that 315,000 unverified votes is a minor detail. Couple that with thousands of voters on our voter rolls that could be unqualified, like the 500,000 that the SOS office recently found, and the hundreds of voters who were born in the 1800s but are still on our Fulton County voter rolls. And the number of people who do not know that it's breaking the law to vote in an old precinct 30 days after moving, even if you just moved one county over. As I conclude, I want to speak directly to those who are feeling the heavy weight of exhaustion from all of this. You've listened to the numbers in Minnesota, the missing signatures in Fulton County, the administrative glitches that seem to only ever point in one direction. And I know that there's temptation. There's temptation to look at this fog of elections, the 1,000-page bills and the legal jargon, the experts who are telling you everything is too complicated for you to understand. I know you're looking at all of that and it seems easier to just withdraw. You want to sit in the fog because, frankly, the fog is quiet. It feels quiet. It's easier to believe that your oversight doesn't matter than to accept the terrifying truth that you are the only thing standing between order and the permanent state of corruption. But let's be honest about this sitting in the fog. What it really is. It isn't peace, it's surrender. Every time you stop watching the board meetings because it's too long, or you stop vetting a candidate because it's the media's labeled them as unqualified or crazy, or you're handing over a blank check to people who want to turn this country into a host of their own power. They're counting on your fatigue. They're weaponizing complexity specifically to make you feel small and confused and ultimately silent. But in a republic, the office of the citizen is the highest office of the land. You are the final auditor. You are the watchdog. You are the moment. And the moment you stop watching, the Trojan horses don't just enter the gates, they start building walls. We are told that trusting the process is our duty. And I tell you that verifying the process is your duty. So as you go about your week, I challenge you, don't let the fog win. If the policy can't be explained to you simply, demand a better explanation. If the voter roll is dirty, demand it be clean. If the tabulator tape isn't signed, don't let them call it a clerical error. History is not written by those who sat in the fog and waited for the light to return. It is written by those who grabbed a lantern, stepped out into the mess, and demanded that truth be told. The fight for our country isn't just happening in Washington or on the state election board. It's happening in your willingness to stay awake, to stay in the game. Until next time, stay unafraid, stay unapologetic, and never stop seeking the truth.